The rain had turned the streets of Portland into sheets of silver when Mara Bennett finally walked out of St. Vincent's Medical Center, carrying a small paper bag of prescriptions and moving carefully after a procedure that had left her exhausted and unsteady. She had expected to see her husband, Ethan, waiting beside the hospital entrance because he had promised that morning, before she was taken away, "When they release you, call me, and I'll be there." But instead her phone displayed a message that made her stop beneath the fluorescent hospital lights. "Something came up at work, so you'll have to figure out a ride home." For several seconds, Mara simply stared at the screen. Hopping another message would appear explaining that he was joking or that someone was already on the way. But the phone remained silent while the cold November wind pushed rain against the glass doors behind her. She eventually accepted a ride from a hospital transport service. Yet during the 40-minute journey through the dark city, she realized that the pain in her body was not the thing hurting most because, for the first time in 12 years of marriage, she understood exactly how alone she had become. When Mara arrived at the old craftsman house they shared in the quiet neighborhood of Hawthorne, their longtime housekeeper, Nora Ellis, opened the door and immediately noticed something was wrong, rushing forward to take Mara's bag and asking, "Where is Ethan, and why didn't he come for you?" Mara gave a tired smile and answered, "Apparently, whatever he had to do tonight was more important than making sure his wife got home safely." And although Nora tried to comfort her, Mara quietly added, "Don't worry about me, Nora. Tonight I finally stopped wondering whether he would change." That evening, instead of climbing into bed and waiting for Ethan to return, Mara opened an old wooden box hidden beneath a stack of winter blankets, revealing copies of financial statements, property records, business agreements, and letters she had collected during the previous 6 months after noticing strange withdrawals from their joint accounts. She had originally gathered the documents because she feared Ethan might be struggling with money, but what she discovered was far worse. He had been secretly moving marital funds into a private investment company registered under his brother's name while telling Mara that their finances were perfectly stable. The discovery had actually begun 3 months earlier when Mara noticed a payment to a company she had never heard of, followed by another transfer and then another. And when she asked Ethan about them, he casually dismissed the transactions as business expenses before changing the subject. Instead of confronting him immediately, Mara contacted a financial investigator through a trusted friend, and what came back was chilling. Ethan had been preparing to sell a portion of their jointly owned property without telling her, apparently believing that once the money was moved, she would be too emotionally overwhelmed to challenge him. But Ethan had made one mistake. He underestimated the woman he had spent years treating as though she would never question him. While he believed Mara was too trusting to notice the missing money, she had quietly opened an account in her own name, secured copies of every important document, consulted a family law attorney named Daniel Reeves, and discovered that the house Ethan considered his greatest asset was actually protected by an ownership agreement Mara's late father had helped establish years before their marriage. The next morning, while Ethan was still sending her messages asking why she had gone quiet, Mara sat across from Daniel in a small office overlooking the river and listened as he explained her options, carefully taking notes instead of crying. "You don't have to make a decision today," Daniel told her, and Mara looked out at the gray water before answering. "I've been making excuses for him for 12 years, so maybe today is the first day I finally make a decision for myself." Over the following 2 days, Mara moved quietly and deliberately, arranging temporary accommodation with her cousin Lena, securing her personal belongings, protecting her financial records, and leaving behind anything that could be replaced because she no longer wanted possessions to become another reason to remain trapped in a life that had already ended emotionally. Nora helped her pack without asking unnecessary questions, but on the morning Mara left, the older woman held her hand and whispered, "You kept waiting for him to become the husband he promised to be," and Mara replied through tears, "I think I finally realized I was allowed to stop waiting." Ethan did not understand what was happening at first because he assumed Mara was simply angry about the hospital incident and would eventually calm down. So he continued his normal routine, attending meetings, staying late at work, and sending increasingly irritated messages such as, "Are you seriously doing this over one bad night?" When he finally returned home on the fourth evening and found the house unusually quiet, he noticed that several drawers were empty, Mara's photographs were gone, and the framed wedding picture that had hung above the fireplace for 12 years had been carefully removed. He immediately called Nora and demanded to know where Mara had gone, but Nora refused to give him the answer he expected, calmly saying, "You should ask yourself why she felt safer leaving than staying." Ethan became furious and accused Nora of helping Mara betray him, yet Nora stood her ground and answered, "She didn't betray you, Ethan. She stopped betraying herself," before walking away and leaving him alone in the silent hallway. The following morning, Ethan discovered an envelope on his desk containing copies of the financial records Mara had uncovered, a letter from Daniel's office, and one handwritten page that contained no insults or accusations, only a sentence that finally forced him to confront the truth. "I spent years believing that being married meant never giving up on us, until I realized I was the only one still fighting." Ethan rushed to the hospital, contacted relatives, called Lena, and even drove to places where he thought Mara might be. But every attempt ended the same way because Mara had already made arrangements to begin a new chapter far away from the promises that had kept her unhappy. 3 weeks later, Ethan returned to the house after an exhausting day of legal meetings and found Nora preparing to leave for the evening, so he stopped her at the doorway and asked in a broken voice, "Does she really hate me that much?" Nora shook her head and replied, "No, Ethan, and that is exactly what you still don't understand. She doesn't hate you anymore because she finally stopped building her life around what you did or didn't do." And for the first time, Ethan lowered his head without an argument, realizing that the woman he thought would always be waiting for him had finally stopped waiting. Months later, Mara stood on the balcony of a small apartment overlooking the Oregon coast, watching waves crash against the rocks while sunlight spilled across the water. And although she still carried memories of the marriage that had broken her trust, she no longer carried the responsibility of fixing it. She understood that the night Ethan failed to pick her up had not destroyed her marriage by itself. It had simply exposed what had been broken for years, and when she finally chose herself, she discovered that starting over was not the end of her story, but the beginning of one she could finally control. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.